Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The throat-crushing grasp had accompanied Bai Xiaochun from qi condensation into foundation establishment. He had used it in the Luokan Mountains and the Fallen Sword world, and had perfected it to the finest degree. Although it was a divine ability that came with the first volume of the Undying Codex, as he had proceeded with his cultivation of the Undying Heavenly King, it had become more and more explosive. It had taken some effort on his part to hold back from using it. Back in the Blood Wasteland, there had been too many people watching him, so even during critical moments, he had suppressed the urge to use it, or other things like Violet Chi Cauldron summoning or his human-controlling grand magic. After all, everyone knew that the Spirit Stream sect focused on control magic, and if he used techniques or divine abilities based on such powers, his identity would likely have been exposed. It was the same with his Heavenspan Dharma Eye, which had, up to this point, remained closed. There were even other things. His turtle walk and his wooden sword, as well as his other treasures which had received threefold spirit enhancements, had all remained hidden. But now, Bai Xiaochun was out of patience. As he shouted out, the throat-crushing grasp appeared, and a truly bloodthirsty aura erupted out of Bai Xiaochun. In combination with the power of the heavenly demon body, the throat-crushing grasp was at the level of being able to shake heaven and earth. Rumbling sounds erupted as his right hand appeared in front of Xiaoqing, allowing the man's two-fingered blood sword to close in. The gravitational force which suddenly appeared caused Xiaoqing's face to fall. He was convinced he must be mistaken, but for some reason, it seemed like Nightcrypt had suddenly changed into someone else. Nightcrypt's claw-like right hand emanated a terrifying aura that filled his heart with fear. Gasping at the sensation of deadly crisis, he lurched back, changing the direction of his blood sword to slash at Bai Xiaochun's hand. His body twisted in bizarre fashion to avoid the attack. In that instant, the blood sword formed by his two fingers made contact with Bai Xiaochun's throat-crushing grasp. A sound rang out like metal scraping on metal, and Bai Xiaochun's hand clamped down hard onto Xiaoqing's fingers. Crack! A shockwave spread out, and Xiaoqing let out a muffled grunt. As he spun backward, his entire right arm trembled. As for his two fingers, they were crushed into non-existence. Face flickering, Xiaoqing barked, "Something's off with Nightcrypt. Yang Hongwu, Zhang Yunshan, join forces and kill him." Instantly, Yang Hongwu and Zhang Yunshan took deep breaths, gritted their teeth, and attacked. Smoke swirled off of the burning incense, forming a blade. A treasured fan swished, creating an explosive wind that resembled a dragon. Bai Xiaochun didn't slow down for even a moment. Howling like a wild beast, he charged onward after Xiaoqing, his right hand clenching into a fist. As he punched out, the heavenly demon appeared, and thunderous rumbling filled the air. As that happened, Bai Xiaochun's left hand flickered with an incantation gesture, and he waved his finger at Yang Hongwu. Instantly, more than a dozen flying swords shot out of his bag of holding. Although they were garishly painted with different colors, it was still possible to see that each one had 3 silver designs on its surface. All of them were treasures that Bai Xiaochun had performed spirit enhancements on, backed by the power of a foundation establishment cultivation base, and controlled by the Violet Chi Heavenspan incantation. As soon as they appeared, Yang Hongwu's expression flickered. Even as rumbling sounds echoed out, Bai Xiaochun continued on without pause, turning his head in the other direction and uttering a single word. Cauldron. A violet cauldron suddenly appeared in front of Zhang Yunshan. It was covered with engravings of magical symbols, and emanated a violet glow and a majestic aura that seemed capable of shaking the heavens. Rumble. Booms rang out as Bai Xiaochun single-handedly fought all 3 opponents. Even as Xiaoqing's face fell, Yang Hongwu's smoke was pierced by the flying swords, and he himself let out a blood-curdling scream as he flew backward, blood splashing out from numerous wounds. Shockingly, even as he fell back, Bai Xiaochun advanced. Clearly, Yang Hongwu was the first person he planned to kill. Protomagnetic wings sprouted out behind him, and with a single flutter, he flew forward with speed that vastly exceeded anything from before. It was almost like a teleportation, placing him right in front of Yang Hongwu. Then, his hand shot out as fast as lightning as he unleashed the throat-crushing grasp onto Yang Hongwu's neck. Screaming, Yang Hongwu went all out in an attempt to defend himself. However, he had lost the initiative. First was the flurry of flying swords, and then the burst of speed, and finally the throat-crushing grasp. His mind was in chaos, and despite all the experience he had engaging in magical combat, he simply couldn't recover from his shock. A cracking sound rang out as the thumb and index finger of Bai Xiaochun's right hand smashed down onto Yang Hongwu's neck, crushing it. Yang Hongwu's scream was cut short, and a look of complete incredulity could be seen in his eyes as they bulged in death. Off to the side, Zhang Yunshan shrieked, Violet Chi Cauldron summoning. You're not Night Crypt. Expression one of complete disbelief, he watched as Bai Xiaochun grabbed Yang Hongwu's incense and then turned to face him. Xiaoqing's expression flickered, and his cultivation base surged as he prepared to block Bai Xiaochun. However, it was then that a large wok suddenly appeared in front of him. No matter what attacks Xiaoqing unleashed, the wok wouldn't budge, and he was blocked before he could even take a half step. That short period of time was a moment of critical danger for Zhang Yunshan. Now that Bai Xiaochun had revealed himself, how could he possibly leave witnesses? He took another step, and the proto-magnetic wings fluttered, giving him another burst of speed. He added to the momentum with the mountain-shaking bash, which also caused his fleshly body power to skyrocket past its previous levels. Not only was he moving at incredible speed, he was drawing upon unimaginable power. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal, but in addition to all that, he yet again used the throat-crushing grasp. Two divine abilities from the Undying Codex were being used in unison, unleashing power so terrifying it was difficult to put into words. As he pierced through the air, his thumb and index finger began to slam together. Zhang Yunshan had no time to dodge, or even react. 1 second, Bai Xiaochun was some distance away, the next second he was right in front of him, his fingers clamping down onto his neck. There wasn't even a need for Bai Xiaochun to crush his fingers down violently. As soon as they touched Zhang Yunshan's neck, his momentum and the power backing him sent Zhang Yunshan flying backward into the wall of the ancient blood path. Boom! The entire path trembled as Bai Xiaochun's hand crushed Zhang Yunshan's neck and slammed him into the wall, sending cracks snaking out in all directions. As for Zhang Yunshan, his corpse was now crushed permanently into the wall. At this point, Xiaoqing finally showed up, his hair disheveled, his eyes radiating madness. You're Bai Xiaochun, aren't you? If by this point he couldn't identify Bai Xiaochun by the techniques he was using, then he didn't deserve to have lived this long. The Bloodstream sect had long since performed a thorough investigation into Bai Xiaochun, and virtually all of the Foundation establishment cultivators had heard stories about him. Everyone knew about Bai Xiaochun's signature magical techniques. Of course, even if Xiaoqing couldn't put the pieces together because of the throat-crushing grasp, Bai Xiaochun had used the Violet Chi Cauldron summoning together with it. That made it more than obvious. Killing you will count as a big service for the sect. Xiaoqing now knew that Night Crypt was Bai Xiaochun, but without evidence, simply reporting the matter would be pointless. Even if he tried to notify Shui Mei and Song Junwan, it wouldn't do any good. It was a moment of deadly crisis, and therefore, Xiaoqing didn't hesitate to begin to crystallize his final spiritual sea. Shockingly, he was attempting to reach core formation right here and now. If he succeeded, then he could kill Bai Xiaochun as easily as flipping over his hand. Although there were certain risks involved, there was no time for delay. Bai Xiaochun filled him with a sense of complete and utter deadly crisis. After all, if Bai Xiaochun hit him with the same attack he had just used on Zhang Yunshan, then his chances of coming out alive were only about 40%. However, in the very moment that his spiritual sea began to crystallize, Bai Xiaochun's Heaven Dao aura erupted out, an aura which could suppress any and all types of Earthstring Foundation establishment. Although Bai Xiaochun was only in mid-Foundation establishment, and couldn't completely prevent Xiaoqing's spiritual sea from crystallizing, he could cause waves to spring up in his spiritual sea, and reduce his core formation energy by 30%. Even as he put pressure on Xiaoqing's rising energy, a third eye opened on Bai Xiaochun's forehead. It was none other than his heaven-span Dharma eye. The violet eye opened, releasing indescribable power. It was as if everything from the most majestic heavens to the deepest hells were nothing more than insects. At the same time, the control power that Bai Xiaochun had been working on for years surged out from within his heaven-span Dharma eye, creating something that couldn't be defended against. Even if Xiaoqing suddenly wanted to resort to calling out to Song Junwan and Shui Mei to tell them about Bai Xiaochun, the heaven-span Dharma eye dashed all such hopes to pieces. Rumble. Xiaoqing felt as though lightning were striking his mind. He began to shake visibly, his expression twisting, his tongue lagging out of his mouth. A muffled howl erupted from his mouth, and blue veins bulged out on his face and neck. Shockingly, he watched as his right hand suddenly began to move, completely beyond his own control. Terror shone in his eyes as his hand reached high up into the air and then rocketed down toward the top of his head. No, smash! His palm crushed his head, sending blood and brain matter showering out in all directions. Xiaoqing died instantly, and his partially crystallized spiritual sea immediately collapsed. A tremor ran through Bai Xiaochun, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Blood leaked out of his third eye, which began to close. A wave of exhaustion spread through him, and he even began to feel dizzy. Panting, he pulled his hand out of the wall, and out of Zhang Yunshan's corpse. A blank look could still be seen in Zhang Yunshan's eyes as his head separated from his body and toppled to the ground. Bai Xiaochun had used only a few dozen breaths of time to kill all three of his opponents. However, it had taken a lot out of him. His face was ashen, but thankfully, he had spirit medicine that he could use to recover. He immediately consumed some pills, and yet, there was no time to sit down and meditate. Retrieving the turtle walk, and taking the 3 bags of holding from the corpses of his enemies, he turned to look toward the end of the path. The wings on his back fluttered, and shot forward, leaving behind nothing but afterimages and sonic booms. While Bai Xiaochun was in the middle of fighting Xiaoqing, Yang Hongwu, and Zhang Yunshan, Song Junwan was barreling down the ancient blood path thanks to the help provided by Bai Xiaochun. She even burned some of her own life blood to speed up as she pursued Shui Mei. Up ahead, Shui Mei frowned as she also accelerated. However, the fact that Song Junwan was burning her life blood ensured that she only got closer and closer. Soon, she was close enough to launch an attack, and the two of them started fighting. As the fighting began, Song Junwan's face was paler than ever. Surprisingly, not only were Shui Mei's injuries completely healed, her cultivation base also seemed to have made some progress, putting her on almost exactly the same level as Song Junwan. Because of their fierce fighting, the two women slowed down, and soon they could hear booms and explosions coming from behind them. There were also words being spoken, but because of the intense rumbling sounds, it was impossible to hear them clearly. Song Junwan's expression flickered. Although she cared about the Bloodmaster title, she was also worried about Night Crypt. After all, for him to simultaneously fight Xiaoqing, Yang Hongwu, and Zhang Yunshan would put him in great danger. The fact that he was putting his life on the line to help her become the Bloodmaster filled her heart with stabs of pain. She was also confused, unsure of whether or not she was doing the right thing. However, there was little time to ponder the matter. Chuckling bitterly, she attacked Shui Mei with all the power she could muster. Shui Mei didn't say much, and from the look in her eye, she was getting very anxious. However, Song Junwan had a profound cultivation base, and couldn't be taken care of quickly. Even as they continued to fight, the sounds behind them suddenly ceased. At the same time, the two women gradually got closer and closer to the end of the ancient blood path. Now visible was an arched doorway that was emanating intense blood-colored light. Clearly, beyond that door existed blood chi so powerful that it was difficult to put into words. That place was the heart cavity and also the location of the blood crystal. Whoever got inside first would have the first chance to get the blood crystal and become Middle Peak's blood master. In the moment that the end of the path became visible, the two women heard a sound from behind them that resembled sonic booms, as though some powerful expert were unleashing all the power at his disposal to race toward them. Also, it was obvious that whoever this person was, it would only take them about 5 or 6 breaths of time to reach them. Shui Mei knew that the chances of that person being Night Crypt were not large, but she wasn't willing to bet on that fact. As she and Song Junwan got closer to the arched doorway, fighting the entire way, she suddenly smiled. Song Junwan, the title of Bloodmaster doesn't belong to you. Although her smile wasn't visible because of the mask, her arrogance was audible in her voice. At this point, she extended her hand, and visible there on her wrist was a violet, triangular mark. Almost as soon as the mark became visible, it flew off of her skin and transformed into 3 diamond-shaped sealing marks which immediately shot toward Song Junwan, emanating powerful pressure. Rumbling sounds echoed out, and Song Junwan shivered. Blood sprayed out of her mouth as she was shoved away from the arched doorway. The 3 diamond-shaped sealing marks were swirling around her, emanating sealing power that Song Junwan simply couldn't break free from. Song Junwan trembled as she looked around at the sealing marks. The sealing method that was being used was almost beyond comprehension, and Song Junwan quickly came to the conclusion that it was the work of Patriarch Limitless. Shui Mei, you cheap slut. Not only did you cheat, Patriarch Limitless also ignored the rules and gave you a sealing treasure. Even if you do become the Bloodmaster, the Song clan won't let this stand. Be a good girl, now. The Bloodmaster title doesn't belong to you anyway. Shui Mei laughed lightly as she took a stop toward the blood-colored door. Bitterness and despair could be seen in Song Junwan's eyes, and her hatred for Shui Mei had reached the pinnacle. It was at that moment, when Shui Mei was just about to step into the door, that deafening rumbling filled the area. Bai Xiaochun appeared, right next to Song Junwan. When he saw the 3 violet sealing marks, his expression flickered, and he punched out with his right hand. That blow was backed by the power of a heavenly demon, but when it landed on the 3 violet diamonds, the sealing marks weren't affected at all. In fact, the force of his blow was directed back at him in a backlash. Bai Xiaochun gasped. Is that a patriarch-level seal? Song Junwan had no time to ponder how Night Crypt had managed to get past Xiao Qing, Yang Hongwu, and Zhang Yunshan. Taking a deep breath, her eyes flickered with determination, and she lifted her right hand up. Laying there in the palm of her hand was a blood-colored command medallion. There was something very strange about the medallion, and as soon as it appeared, the sealing marks around her began to twist and distort. Although they didn't shatter, it was clear that they would collapse within the time it takes an incense stick to burn. Unfortunately, Song Junwan didn't have that much time on her hands. Night Crypt, take my Blood Master command medallion. I don't care how you do it, become the Blood Master. You can't let that slut succeed. Song Junwan was throwing caution to the wind. Without any more hesitation, she hurled the command medallion toward Bai Xiaochun. Because of the strange properties of the medallion itself, it passed directly through the seal, to be snatched out of the air by Bai Xiaochun. Almost immediately, he could feel it vibrating as if with joy, as if it viewed Bai Xiaochun with ultimate approval. Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened, but this wasn't the time for consideration. If Shui Mei succeeded, he would be in grave danger, and he couldn't let that happen. Gritting his teeth, he shot toward the blood-colored archway with blinding speed. As Song Junwan watched this happen, her entire body seemed to weaken, and yet, a smile broke out on her face. Night Crypt, if you succeed, I'll do everything I can to make sure your position as Blood Master is stable. Suddenly, she was struck with the feeling that this was definitely the right decision. If Night Crypt did manage to become the Blood Master, that was something the Song clan could probably accept. Bai Xiaochun disappeared into the doorway, her words echoing in his ears. The world of the heart cavity was filled with blood-colored light. In the very middle, a gigantic heart was visible, and although it was still and unmoving, it radiated an intense pressure that could shake heaven and earth. Enormous blood vessels stretched out in all directions, making the entire place something like a maze. Resting on top of the heart itself was a blood crystal which emanated both radiant light and intense pressure. From the feeling it let off, it seemed that anyone who acquired it would have control over part of a legacy. They would control one of the blood ancestors' fingers. That blood crystal was required of anyone who wished to become the Middle Peak Blood Master. Shui Mei was currently speeding in the direction of the blood crystal, her eyes shining with a strange light. Oddly, a head-sized crystal was currently floating along next to her, within which was a blurry figure that was screaming at the top of its lungs. It's there, right there, shut up, Shui Mei growled, pushing forward with even more speed. However, it was at that moment that her eyes narrowed, and she looked back to see Night Crypt stepping through the entrance. Shui Mei's jaw dropped, and her killing intent immediately spiked. However, all she did was look back at the heart and push forward with greater speed than before. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath as he looked around. As soon as he caught sight of Shui Mei, his wings fluttered, and he shot in her direction. By calling upon all of the proto-magnetic powers of gravity and repulsion, he was capable of speed that far surpassed Shui Mei's. At the very moment that she reached the heart, he caught up with her. Bai Xiaochun was actually feeling a bit depressed. His goal had been to become the Grand Elder, but thanks to a freak combination of factors, he was now fighting to become the Blood Master. There was no time to ponder the situation, he absolutely could not let Shui Mei succeed, and therefore, he was left with few options. I guess I underestimated Song Junwan's boldness, Shui Mei said, chuckling, and then her right hand flashed with an incantation gesture. Instantly, a golden arc of electricity shot out from her finger toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun was about to counterattack, but then his face flickered. That golden arc of electricity seemed even more terrifying than anything which Xiao Qing, Yang Hongwu, or Zhang Yunshan had unleashed. Without the slightest hesitation, Bai Xiaochun used the mountain-shaking bash to evade the electricity and charge directly toward Shui Mei. As soon as he appeared in front of her, he unleashed a fist strike, causing her pupils to constrict. Her lovely left hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and she slapped at his fist. As soon as their hands made contact, her hand turned golden, and Bai Xiaochun gasped at the sensation of intense power, which seemed no weaker than his own fleshly body power. As he staggered backward, he looked up to see shock in Shui Mei's eyes as she also lurched backward. Just as she was about to unleash another attack, the blood crystal seemed to respond to Bai Xiaochun's presence. Vibrating, it suddenly flew up into the air and shot toward him. The shocking scene caused Shui Mei's eyes to fill with astonishment. At the same time, the blurry figure in the crystal hovering next to her screamed, "Stop him. Don't let him get it." "Shut up," Shui Mei said, grinding her teeth. Suddenly, her eyes turned bright gold, and the blood-colored light which surrounded her vanished. Golden light sprang up around her, and she grew visibly gaunt as she used a divine ability that gave her great strength at the cost of some of her life force. With that, she extended her right hand and pointed at Bai Xiaochun. This was none other than her most powerful trump card. A hand materialized behind her that looked just like her own right hand, with finger extended. It was huge, and radiated an intense power that filled Bai Xiaochun with a keen sensation of deadly crisis. Prickling stabs of pain filled him, as though the basic structure of his body were being altered. The sensation of danger that washed through him exceeded anything he had felt when fighting Xiao Qing, Yang Hongwu, and Zhang Yunshan, and even surpassed the feelings he had experienced when he was being chased by the Luocan clan. The only thing it could compare to was the feeling he'd experienced because of the girl in the white dress, back in the fallen sword world. Rumbling sounds filled his mind, and he knew that he could not simply sit out this crisis and wait until it ended. Nor could he try to flee. If he did, he would die. His intuition was telling him that the only way to deal with this divine ability was to attack it head-on. Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base erupted with power, and his wings flickered as the powers of gravity and repulsion erupted out, imbuing the mountain-shaking Bash with even more power than before, and sending him shooting at top speed toward Shui Mei. Golden touch. As the words left Shui Mei's mouth, they rumbled like thunder. At the same time, she waved her finger down, and the huge hand behind her rumbled forth, emanating pressure like that of the heavens. As they closed in on each other, Shui Mei's finger stabbed toward Bai Xiaochun's forehead. At the same time, his thumb and forefinger began to snap shut as he unleashed the throat-crushing grasp. As of this moment, he was holding nothing back. He was going all out with every bit of power he possessed. The turtle walk appeared, shielding him as he reached out toward Shui Mei's neck. Just when they were about to make contact, Shui Mei's body suddenly blurred as she tried to dodge to the side. And yet, Bai Xiaochun had been prepared for that possibility, and gravitational force erupted out of his palm with unprecedented power. It locked down onto Shui Mei, making it impossible for her to move out of the way. A look of panic rose up in her eyes, and in that moment, her mask fell off. Now it was possible to see a spectacularly beautiful face, with pure, fair skin. The instant Bai Xiaochun saw her facial features, he felt like 100,000 lightning bolts were striking his mind, as if his brain were about to explode. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, and instinctively blurted, "Boo." Unexpectedly, this young woman was Du Lingfei. Bai Xiaochun would never forget that face. He couldn't forget it. This was the very same person who had gone missing all those years ago. Du Lingfei. Bai Xiaochun felt like his mind was spinning, as if his heart were being battered by massive waves of shock. Never could he possibly have imagined that such a familiar face would be beneath that mask. At the same time, when Bai Xiaochun said, "Boo," the unmasked Shui Mei was equally shaken. An indescribable expression gripped her face, as though she had just been struck by lightning from heaven. She also felt as if waves of shock were battering her heart and mind. There was only one person who would ever call her such a thing, and that was Bai Xiaochun from the Spirit Stream sect. "Bai Xiaochun," she blurted. She had long since come to believe that she would never see Bai Xiaochun again. Back when they had parted, she had wished that she could sever her own thoughts, erase her memories of him. However, when she heard him call her "Boo," it caused her to shake visibly. At that moment, she knew that she would never be able to forget the Spirit Stream sect, or the events in the Luocan Mountains. She would never be able to forget Bai Xiaochun. Time seemed to slow to a crawl in the world of the heart cavity as Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei looked at each other. Bai Xiaochun had been in the middle of unleashing the throat-crushing grasp with all the power of his cultivation base, but now, he did everything he could to alter the trajectory of the attack. A backlash hit him, and cracking sounds rang out from the bones in his arm as they shattered. Intense pain surged through him, but he still managed to twist the throat-crushing grasp so that it passed by Du Lingfei. Unfortunately, although Bai Xiaochun was able to call upon his incredible battle prowess to change the direction of the throat-crushing grasp, Du Lingfei's golden touch magic had been fueled by her own life force. Because of that, it surpassed the limits of her own Tao. In much the same way that a child could never control a raging tiger, she could do nothing to stop the magic once it had been unleashed. "No," she screamed, thrusting her trembling left hand out in an attempt to change the direction of the divine ability. Cracking sounds rang out as her arm twisted sickeningly. Although she managed to slightly change the trajectory of the huge hand, she couldn't slow it down at all, and it continued on directly toward Bai Xiaochun. Although all of this takes some time to describe, it all happened within the briefest of moments. Within the blink of an eye, the huge hand was directly in front of Bai Xiaochun. A huge boom filled the air, and blood sprayed out of Bai Xiaochun's mouth as he tumbled backward like a kite with its string cut. The heavenly demon body was destroyed as Bai Xiaochun was simultaneously hit with his own backlash and Du Lingfei's mysterious divine ability. His body was now being turned into gold. This was not the golden light of the undying gold skin, but rather, the fundamental structure of his body was rapidly changing, transforming him into a statue of golden metal. Tears began to stream down Du Lingfei's cheeks. Terrified, she flew toward Bai Xiaochun. Xiaochun, although it was shining with golden light, Bai Xiaochun's face was deathly pale as he looked over at Du Lingfei. There were many questions he wished to ask her, and many things he wanted to say. The complex emotions could be seen in his eyes, but as he opened his mouth to speak, blood sprayed out. His body was currently beyond his own control. His cultivation base was in chaos, and his vision was growing dim. In her anxiety, Du Lingfei completely forgot about the trial by fire. Her mission was now the last thing on her mind. The only thing she was thinking about was Bai Xiaochun as she sped toward him. However, at that very moment, the blood crystal apparently sensed that Bai Xiaochun was coughing up blood. The crystal suddenly began to burn, emitting thunderous rumbling sounds as it moved toward him so quickly it was almost a teleportation. The air shattered as the blood crystal appeared directly in front of Bai Xiaochun. The crystal seemed to thrum with excitement and joy as, without pausing for a moment, it shot toward his chest. As it neared, blood chi spread out and stabbed into him, fusing with his heart. Bai Xiaochun trembled visibly as intense pain spread out from his heart. He let out a hoarse shout as he was thrown backward, slamming into one of the huge blood vessels. Just before he hit the withered blood vessel, it erupted with life force, a soft power that simultaneously grabbed a hold of Bai Xiaochun and pulled him toward it. Bai Xiaochun was sucked into the blood vessel. Blood-colored light flared, spreading out in all directions as the blood vessel seemed to be restored to its original condition. Things didn't stop there, though. As the light filled the world of the heart cavity, all of the other blood vessels were enveloped in it and began to emanate strong life force as well. Within moments, the blood vessels began to twitch, sending bursts of power toward the heart itself. Thump thump, the withered heart moved, emitting thunderous pounding that echoed out throughout the entire body of the blood ancestor. At the same time, that movement seemed to suddenly shove Bai Xiaochun along through the blood vessel, propelling him along towards some unknown destination. That having been accomplished, the heart once again withered up, as did the surrounding blood vessels. An incredibly powerful force of expulsion then appeared, wrapping around Du Lingfei. No matter how much she might have wanted to stay behind, she was completely incapable. Mixed emotions could be seen in her eyes as she looked at the spot where Bai Xiaochun had disappeared, and sighed. Although Bai Xiaochun was injured, she knew that the other legacy which had taken hold of him would not fail. She slowly reached down and picked up her mask as her body faded away, and she was expelled from the body of the blood ancestor. Song Junwan, who was still outside the heart cavity on the ancient blood road, also began to fade away as she was removed. As of this moment, the only people who remained inside the world of the blood ancestor's body were the dead, and Bai Xiaochun. As for the beating of the heart which had thundered out moments ago, although it only happened once, the sound echoed out into the outside world. The sky went dim, and the lands quaked. Waves even appeared on the surface of the Heavenspan River. Countless cultivators in the bloodstream sect felt their hearts begin to pound, and their cultivation bases suddenly freeze up. From the outer sect disciples to the patriarchs, everyone was affected. What's going on? Something's wrong. My heart is beating out of control. My cultivation base stopped working. It's destabilizing. How could this be happening? And what was that sound just now? On Lesser Marsh Peak, Nameless Peak, Middle Peak and Corpse Peak, all cultivators, Grand Elders and Blood Masters flew out, their expressions flickering. On Ancestor Peak, the Prime Elders were shocked, and the Blood Rippers were all shaken from their trances in secluded meditation. Even the patriarchs were astonished. The Song clan patriarch was in the middle of meditating, but his eyes snapped open, and his expression flickered. Patriarch Limitless emerged from his Immortals cave and looked off into the distance, his eyes shining brightly. Has the Middle Peak Blood Master been selected? Even if the Blood Master was selected, something extreme like this shouldn't be happening. Even as everyone looked around in shock, Shuimei and Song Junwan appeared in midair, alongside Song Ke and all of the other surviving Dharma protectors. Song Junwan was panting as she looked over in Shui Mei's direction. However, Night Crypt was nowhere to be seen. Assuming that Night Crypt had failed, Song Junwan's heart began to pound. But then, she realized that Shui Mei didn't seem to have reached the Bloodmaster level. Behind her mask, her eyes seemed filled with confusion, almost as if she had lost control of her soul. The arrival of the group from within the Blood Ancestor, as well as the sudden deafening sound from moments ago, left the cultivators of the Bloodstream sect initially confused. But then, a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering beam of blood-colored light shot up from Middle Peak, rising up into the air to form the image of a face. It was none other than Night Crypt. Blood-colored light from Middle Peak. That's the sign of the Bloodmaster. That means that somebody succeeded in becoming the new Bloodmaster. But that face, it's Night Crypt. Did he become the new Bloodmaster? How is this possible? The Middle Peak Bloodmaster isn't Shui Mei or Song Junwan. How could it possibly be? Night Crypt. Eyes went wide, and mind spun. People cried out in shock. Everyone was completely and utterly astonished. That was especially true of the people on Ancestor Peak. Numerous streams of divine sense exploded out, even from the stunned patriarchs. Despite the widespread shock, the cultivators of Middle Peak were all deeply moved. To them, it was a moment of profound solemnity. No matter whether they wished it or not, they felt a sudden uncontrollable impulse that caused them to drop down and kowtow to the face of Night Crypt. Song Ke, Song Zhen, Song Junwan, Shui Mei, Master God Diviner. They all dropped to their knees. Everyone who cultivated the secret magics of Middle Peak had no choice but to give obeisance. They even felt as if their blood chi were on the verge of collapsing. That was the power of a Bloodmaster. A person who could control the entire mountain peak. The face floating in the blood-colored light above Middle Peak told everyone that the Bloodmaster of Middle Peak had been determined, and it was none other than Night Crypt. Everyone who was familiar with Night Crypt's face was shaken. Xu Zhaoshan gasped and rubbed his eyes. Although it seemed somewhat improbable, it actually made sense for this to have happened. Night Crypt had risen to prominence over the course of only a few years, but had come to influence the entire sect. He was even famous on the outside. For him to become the Bloodmaster was within the realm of predictability. In fact, it was a logical outcome. The Grand Elder of Corpse Peak looked on with wide eyes. Next to him, the Corpse Peak Bloodmaster seemed equally dazed. However, it only took a moment for him to smile. Then, his eyes began to shine, as though he were looking at an equal. Bloodmasters were a proud lot, and as far as they were concerned, the only people who were worthy of being adversaries were the other Bloodmasters. Interesting, he murmured to himself. Other mountain peaks have had Bloodmasters who didn't come from the major cultivator clans. Up to now, Middle Peak has been the only one who hasn't. How did Night Crypt manage to turn things around and become Bloodmaster when all the cards were stacked against him? Considering how important he is with his skill in the Tao of Medicine, he'll definitely be a formidable opponent in the future. The Bloodmaster of Lesser Marsh Peak, the tall, burly man, looked on with a strange light shining in his eyes. He knew that, as of this moment, he would not be able to treat Night Crypt the way he had in the past. After a moment, he looked over at the Grand Elder of Lesser Marsh Peak and said, "Prepare a really nice gift to send over and ease some of the previous tension." Shaken, the Grand Elder nodded. He also knew that, from now on, Night Crypt was on a different level. Before, the patriarchs had liked him, and yet, held his fate in their hands. A mere thought on their part could lead to his rise, and also his fall. But now, things were different. Now that he was a Bloodmaster, he had his own solid foundation. He was one of the true powers of the Bloodstream sect. He had the power of an entire mountain peak at his disposal, and had been approved by the Blood Ancestor. Not even the Bloodstream sect patriarchs would casually make a move against him. If Night Crypt eventually reached core formation, he would become a Blood Ripper, which was a position superior to that of a Prime Elder. That would make him a core element among the core elements of the sect. A person like that was someone nobody could afford to provoke. The Bloodmaster and Grand Elder of Nameless Peak were feeling much the same way as their counterparts from Lesser Marsh Peak. They quickly made arrangements to bring an impressive gift along for their next visit to Night Crypt. Many thoughts and feelings could be found within the Bloodstream sect now that Night Crypt had become a Bloodmaster. As for Shui Mei, she hovered there in midair, a blank look in her eyes. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then simply coughed up some blood. Eyes flickering dully, she turned and headed toward Ancestor Peak in a beam of light. Upon arrival, the first thing she did was confer with her father, Patriarch Limitless. Then she went to her Immortals cave on Ancestor Peak and went into secluded meditation. People took note of Shui Mei's attitude, but didn't ponder it too deeply. After all, anyone who failed to succeed in a fight for the position of Blood Master would find the situation hard to accept. Shui Mei was acting just as it would be expected for her to act. Although Song Junwan had mixed feelings, she gritted her teeth and flew toward Ancestor Peak to find the Song clan patriarch. The new Blood Master was not from the Song clan, and that was a very important matter. It was now a fact that could not be changed, so the Song clan patriarch would surely have questions and direction for her. Night Crypt, she thought, I promised that if you stopped Shui Mei from succeeding, even if you became Blood Master yourself, that I would help persuade the patriarch to accept and support you. Taking a deep breath, her eyes shone with determination as she arrived at Ancestor Peak and offered greetings to the Song clan patriarch. Everyone was shaken by the events which were playing out. However, the cultivators of the Bloodstream sect soon realized that something was odd about the situation. Weird, Night Crypt is now the Bloodmaster. But, why hasn't he come out from the trial by fire yet? In the past, the new Bloodmaster would be teleported out immediately. But Night Crypt is still inside the Blood Ancestor's body? Soon, more and more people began to wonder the same thing. By that time, Bai Xiaochun had appeared in a region inside the Blood Ancestor's body that no Bloodstream sect cultivator had ever entered before. It was a world that seemed to be formed from shattered ruins, from countless fragmented chunks of land that made up a larger continent. On first sight, it actually resembled an enormous, shattered mirror. It was so large that its ends weren't even visible. The broken fragments stretched as far as the eye could see, emanating an aura of death that cast everything in a gray light. There were no signs of life anywhere. Everything was gray, and the pressure that weighed down on the area mounted continuously. Bai Xiaochun looked around blankly, unsure of where he was. He remembered aborting his throat-crushing grasp. He remembered Shui Mei's mask falling off. He remembered seeing Du Lingfei's face. However, everything had occurred too quickly. Not only could he never have been prepared for any of it to happen, it completely exceeded anything he could have imagined. As he thought about what had just occurred, his mind trembled as though it were being rocked by thunder. There were so many questions he wanted to ask Du Lingfei, and yet before he could open his mouth to ask them, he was sucked into the blood vessel. The next thing he remembered was looking around at the gray world around him. As he hovered in the air above the shattered world, he took a deep breath and looked down to examine himself. All of his wounds were gone, even the effects of Shui Mei's golden touch. He was healed and restored to his absolute peak. A powerful blood chi swirled inside of him, and his undying live forever technique was pulsing, seemingly forming a resonance with the world around him. Ripples spread out from him that caused the world to fluctuate. As the two sets of fluctuations merged, the ripples grew more and more powerful, to a shocking degree. At the same time, rays of light began to shine up from within the cracks that separated the shattered fragments of the world. Bai Xiaochun began to pant as he slowly formed speculations about where exactly he was. Back when he'd first entered the Bloodstream sect, he had felt a resonance very much like this, the source being something below the surface of the sect. Apparently, all such resonances that he felt in the Bloodstream sect originated from this very location. This was their origin. Heart-pounding, he decided to try to take a step forward. As he did, intense rumbling sounds filled the entire world around him. At the same time, the resonance between his undying live forever technique and the world grew more intense, more powerful. It was like the whole world was roaring. It was a roar of complete excitement and anticipation. The glow that filled the world began to flicker rapidly, and the beams of light shooting up from between the gaps began to link together. Soon, channels of electricity pulsed through the world, all of them connected. The electricity flickered more and more quickly, and the rumbling sounds grew more intense. It was almost as if a life force were awakening that had been asleep for many years, something that was struggling to emerge from death because of the resonance which had formed. RUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUUU The entire world seemed to be waking up. The blinding beams of light were fully connected, filling the world with multicolored light as a powerful life force erupted out. It came from nowhere, as if it had been waiting for countless years to emerge. Although it was only a moment of recovered youth, it was enough to fulfill the dying wishes of the giant that was the blood ancestor. Rumble. Deafening rumbling sounds echoed out, and the countless shattered fragments that made up the world began to tremble. Innumerable bolts of lightning were stirring, and then, they all simultaneously shot out toward Bai Xiaochun. In the blink of an eye, they were upon him, flooding over him, boring into his skin through his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, even through the pores of his skin. Shaking violently, Bai Xiaochun threw his head back and let loose a long cry. More lightning poured into him, as if the accumulated life force of the whole world were using its last bit of power to deliver a legacy. This was the ultimate legacy, something above the Bloodmaster level. The lightning bolts all contained memories, countless memories which bored into Bai Xiaochun, filling his mind, forming a complete tableau of memories. A legacy is memories. They were not memories revealing the origins of the blood ancestor, nor were they recollections of his life. They did not include visions of what had occurred upon his death. Apparently, all aspects of the will of the blood ancestor had vanished completely. Perhaps, in the moments before his death, the blood ancestor wasn't worried about trying to possess someone to return to life years later. He only wanted one thing: to pass on his legacy. His legacy of the undying live forever technique. Apparently, the blood ancestor felt that the legacy of the undying live forever technique was even more important than his own life. Insane rumbling sounds filled Bai Xiaochun's mind as the countless lightning bolts from the world poured into him. Soon, the life force he had felt began to fade and dissipate. As for the lightning bolts, they bored relentlessly into Bai Xiaochun, causing the fragmented memories to gradually solidify into the first portion of the legacy. That was the undying skin. The first volume of the Undying Codex was the cultivation method for the undying skin, which now rapidly grew clear in his mind. In fact, he even came to notice some areas where his own cultivation methods were slightly different. Apparently, this portion of the legacy was even more ancient than what he had studied. Before Bai Xiaochun could analyze it in much detail, rumbling filled his mind as the second portion of the legacy appeared. It was the second volume, that of the Undying Heavenly King. Strangely, his version of the legacy was exactly the same as what Bai Xiaochun had acquired from the Gravekeeper. There were absolutely no differences. Bai Xiaochun was already panting. Now, the third portion of the legacy appeared inside of him, and as soon as he saw it, he was completely shaken, and his eyes shone with excitement. Shockingly, it was the Undying Tendons. The first sentence within the legacy of the Undying Tendons was, "Grow the tendons by 1 portion, extend longevity by 10 years. Bit by bit, the complete mnemonic to cultivate the undying tendons appeared within his mind. Bai Xiaochun was breathing hard. He knew that, with this legacy, even if he didn't eventually acquire the relic of eternal indestructibility, everything he had done had been worth it, just to acquire the cultivation method of the undying tendons. But of course, the legacy wasn't over yet. Even as the undying tendons technique floated in his mind, the fourth portion of the legacy bored into him. Floating there in his mind could be seen the undying bones. The resilience of power comes from the bones, and can support limitless strength. Bai Xiaochun trembled. His eyes seemed to burn with fire as the cultivation technique of the undying bones swirled in his mind. His heart was pounding as, for the first time, he took the initiative to absorb the lightning surrounding him. The next volume is definitely the ultimate portion of the Undying Codex, the Undying Blood. He howled inwardly, and his mind trembled as the Undying Blood appeared. Blood is the ultimate foundation of the physical body. As of this point, all 5 volumes of the Undying Codex had been passed on to Bai Xiaochun, and existed in his mind, full and complete. To Bai Xiaochun, the complete Undying Codex was indescribably precious. Without this bit of good fortune, after he mastered the Undying Heavenly King, he would have been forced to find the Undying Tendons volume on his own. Unfortunately, the lands of Heavenspan were huge, and Bai Xiaochun wouldn't even have known where to begin looking for it. Furthermore, he would have been forced to expend significant resources to do so. It would have been like searching for a needle in the ocean. Even if by some random chance he happened to acquire the cultivation method for the undying tendons, he would have next been forced to look for the undying bones method, and finally, the undying blood. But now, he had the full and complete Undying Codex there in his mind. On Bai Xiaochun's path of cultivation, this type of good fortune could only be described as remarkable. The complete 5 volumes formed something cyclical, meaning that Bai Xiaochun now understood the Undying Codex as a whole much better. The skin was an external protection. The Heavenly King flesh provided power. The tendons increased speed. The bones provided the structure. The blood was the essence. These 5 aspects together formed the Undying Codex, and if someone cultivated all of them to completion, then it would be easier to find a phoenix feather or a Qilin horn than to find someone who could kill them. That person would essentially be undying. Because of the unification of the Undying Codex within Bai Xiaochun, his heavenly demon body erupted with power. Blood chi surged inside of him, and when it combined with the lightning, it caused a second heavenly demon to appear behind him. His fleshly body power increased exponentially. Trembling, he threw his head back and howled. And yet, the transmission of the legacy wasn't over yet. The lightning which crackled around him began to coalesce into a lightning crystal. The crystal was glittering brilliantly, filled with innumerable magical symbols that flickered and glowed, almost as if they were thoughts. When Bai Xiaochun looked closer, he realized that within those symbols, he could see faces. After looking even more closely at the faces, his heart shivered, and he gasped. Most of those faces were people he recognized, cultivators of the Bloodstream sect. He saw Song Junwan, Song Ke, the Song clan patriarch, Patriarch Limitless, Xu Zhaoshan, the Bloodmasters. There were many, many people, including quite a few that he didn't recognize. His eyes went wide. The matter didn't take much thought to comprehend, he quickly guessed who these faces were. These are all of the people who have drawn upon on the hand of the Blood Ancestor to further their cultivation. They borrowed the Blood Ancestor's power for their cultivation, and thus, they established invisible connections with him. Bai Xiaochun felt like his mind was being struck by thunder. In the moment that the lightning crystal formed, the countless fragments that made up the world around him faded and went dark. All of the life force which had been present was now gone, and yet, the lightning crystal flickered with boundless light. The appearance of the lightning crystal didn't just cause the surrounding fragments to grow dark. Everything inside of the Blood Ancestor's body seemed to fade. It was as if the lightning crystal surpassed everything else present. This legacy has two main parts. The first part is the legacy of the Undying Codex. The second part is the Blood Ancestor's personal legacy. Throughout the years, everyone who has cultivated with the help of the Blood Ancestor has become connected to him. That connection is part of the legacy. In addition to the Blood Master legacies inside the Blood Ancestor, there is also the legendary, the one and only Blood Devil legacy. That's what I'm receiving right now. This is the Blood Devil legacy. Bai Xiaochun's mind spun as he understood everything. The lightning crystal shot toward his forehead and pierced inside of him. Instantly, pain washed through him, and he howled. Shaking from the agony, he suddenly seemed to leave his body. His consciousness floated up and out of his head, spreading out, to fill the entire body of the Blood Ancestor. From the head, it raced out, reaching all the way to the feet and the hands. Millions of strands of his consciousness filled the Blood Ancestor. He could sense the waters of the Heavenspan River surrounding him, soaking him. His right hand was reaching out of the river, stretching toward the heavens, and yet, he had no energy left. At the same time, he realized that a sect was located on his hand, and everyone in that sect relied on his help to practice cultivation. From the patriarchs to the outer sect disciples, everyone had a blood-colored gleam in their eyes. The sensation was very strange, but Bai Xiaochun didn't have time to analyze it before everything suddenly ended. His consciousness dispersed, and when he opened his eyes, he was back where he had been inside the body of the Blood Ancestor. It was almost as if everything which had just occurred was nothing more than a dream. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath, and a blank look could be seen in his eyes. It almost felt as if he had just become the Blood Ancestor. Although the sensation had ended quickly, he still felt countless thoughts swirling around in his mind, thoughts that weren't his own. They were thoughts from countless years in the past, the thoughts of everyone who had ever called upon the Blood Ancestor for help in cultivation. Now that the countless fragments of the world around him had faded into darkness, the legacy transmission was over. Although that ending came without any fanfare, Bai Xiaochun felt different. From what he could feel inside of him, he had the power to suppress the cultivation bases of anyone who had cultivated the path of the Blood Ancestor. Whether they were people or animals, corpses or gargoyles. Whether they were outer sect disciples or inner sect disciples, Dharma protectors or elders, blood masters or prime elders, blood rippers, or even patriarchs. Although he couldn't completely suppress them, he knew that a single thought on his part could reduce their cultivation bases by at least half. Of course, the person truly doing the suppressing wouldn't be him, it would be the Blood Ancestor. Now that Bai Xiaochun had acquired the legacy of the Blood Ancestor, for all intents and purposes, he was the new Blood Ancestor. Although his cultivation base was currently too low, not nearly as fearsome and terrifying as the original Blood Ancestors, it was still correct to say that after obtaining the thoughts of the legacy, he was the living, second Blood Ancestor. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.